44 Flood is an artist collective based in Chicago, Illinois, and our flagship book is the TOME anthology. We launched it about 2 years ago, and with a huge support from Kickstarter backers, we're able to make the book. The idea behind TOME is to make an oversized book, something that presents art almost like seeing the originals in person. So we have this large format, it's 12 by 18 inches, 200 pages with a CD included. And you'll get perspectives from all sorts of artists, not just painters, but graffiti artists, tattoo artists, clothing designers. We drew from many different disciplines and had people give their perspectives on a theme. And that theme is usually slightly esoteric. Like the first volume of Tome was vampirism, and it wasn't about fangs and glittery skin. It was about how we exploit and objectify one another, and we gave the artists complete carte blanche to do what they wanted over 4 to 6 pages. And the last element of it is that we would couple the artists with another artist, and they would have a conversation or an interview with one another to talk about the theme and aspects of the theme. Tome Volume 1 came out in March of 2013, and we're now currently working on Tome Volume 2. That has the theme of Melancholia. Now, a lot of people react when they hear the word Melancholia. And with Tome Volume 2, our intention is to distinguish between melancholy and melancholia. And so we're going to make a series of videos here at 44 Flood. Keith Carmack, who is our videographer, and myself are putting these together over the next several months to try to help convey at least what we intend and what we mean by melancholia or inspired melancholia, where there is a drive and a fury to go within oneself and harness abilities, techniques, tools in order to express that which one is compelled to express, and then eventually to go through that cycle all over again, versus melancholy, which in recent history has been presented with a narcissistic component to it, almost a self-mutilating element to it. And the idea from Aristotle of inspired melancholia has all been forgotten. It's been depicted by artists and writers of every form for centuries, and it seems that in the last 100 to 200 years we've managed to erase all that came before then, and that's tragic. So with this video series, we'll have voiceover connected to images. Now, this isn't going to be the most polished PBS ready series. This is about information and images. This is to convey to you the substance of inspired melancholia in contrast to melancholy, and how it affects the artist and its processes from stage 1, 2, and 3. And its meaning, its relevance, and how it is that you can observe it, and how it may have meaning to you. So I wanted to talk to you about how I came about melancholia in my own life. I went to visit some friends in Paris in the spring of 2006, and I had just missed a huge exposition on melancholy at the Grand Palais. And my friend was telling me all about it, how it was a shame that I missed it, how amazing it was. And instead of walking around Paris and going to all the tourist spots and drinking and eating and all the things that you do in Paris, we spent a week talking about melancholia, this idea that it was something different than just depression. I'd grown up thinking that it was just a depressive state. And in this show, we actually walked around Paris during that week just looking for a catalog for that show, and I actually have the soft cover here, the hardcover somewhere. The show was called Melancholy, Genius and Madness in the West, and it was basically a survey of art and thinking and writing from antiquity to present on melancholy. And it touched on some of this idea of it being an inspired state that had been depicted that way, had been described that way by Aristotle and others. It had been painted and demonstrated that way, that there were symbols, things that artists had continuously utilized to denote this state, that it wasn't quite depression, that it was something more than that, sometimes quite profoundly more than that. And then it went all the way through to modern art as well, and how this idea of melancholy had changed. So the show was extraordinary in scope. It did not focus on melancholia as this idea of an inspired state. It was more about, it was once this, it became this, here are the different ideas about it. And it's funny because when the show was first proposed, the powers that be there didn't think that anyone would come to a show about depression. And the fact is there were lines outside the door every day that show was open. And I would submit that people will line up for a show about depression, and the lines would be much shorter if you were talking about actual melancholia, the inspired form of melancholia, which is what we want to talk to you about and what we're going to explore in Tome Volume 2. So over the next several months, please look out for more of these videos, and this first one is simply an introduction to melancholia with contrast to melancholy.
All right, now, as you can see from the image of the collage I put there, we have not only the Melancholia 1 of Durer, and Melancholia itself as postulated by Aristotle, but we also have the Freudian aspects and those that Mr. Clare decided to put into his exhibit, Melancholy, Genius, and Madness in the West. Fascinating exhibit, but I'm afraid they missed the point of Melancholia entirely, though they did great justice to the idea of the Freudian aspects of melancholy. The point being that with Melancholia 1, you have basically inspired melancholia displayed to you. It is a figure in shadow, in deep, almost trance-like meditative state, that is surrounded by all of the objects it has had to learn to utilize, to master, in order that it might produce that which its inspired melancholia requires it to. That, I fear, is the, shall we say, symptomatic and most amazingly plain difference between melancholia and melancholy. Melancholia always is filled with a furor, a fury, a genius, a demand to make, to do, to go into oneself in this meditative state, to even access the collective consciousness of man, the psyche, as it were, of life and the universe itself, and bring forth those interpretations of what one has seen. This is what artists, political figures, great warriors, great generals, from Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar, Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and of course more to our realm of concern, Picasso, Raphael, Rubens, Michelangelo, and Da Vinci, not to say we've exhausted the subject. The point being that with Melancholia, you have production. You have an understanding of what is to be done, what is to be created. With melancholy, you don't. With melancholy, what you have is a form of narcissistic depression that can lead to autoanthropophage, cannibalism of oneself, and eventually suicide. It's been known to happen. The problem, of course, is that when you take someone who is a melancholic in the inspired melancholic sense, and you frustrate their desire to produce, you find them without the ability to manifest that which is theirs. Then can you run into the quicksand, the trap, the cul-de-sac of Freudian melancholy. This has happened to any number of artists, and today we, of course, catch our artists as early as possible, and we try to medicate them for their bipolar dysfunction if we can and are permitted. This, of course, leads to a number of problems for us, in that our art is not as shall we say, inspiring. It doesn't carry a vision as it did at one time. Again, this is a fault of not the artist, but the artist, shall we say, reasoned fear of what society and those in power will say, do, or force upon them. This is not to say that the artist lacks courage, but that the culture lacks courage. The real difficulty we have at this point is in knowing what inspired Melancholia does. For instance, when Durer made his famous engraving Melancholia 1, everyone expected Melancholia 2 and 3. Most people will concede that Melancholia 3 is actually St. Jerome in his study, as far as Durer was concerned, leaving us at a loss as to Melancholia 2 from this artist. However, Raphael did us one better. He gave us Melancholia 1, 2, and 3 in one picture, that picture being the School of Athens. In the School of Athens, you will see that Raphael has laid out for us a group of philosophers, rather large group, and at the bottom center of the painting, in its foreground, you will see Heraclitus and Diogenes resting on the steps. Heraclitus is in almost a meditative, contemplative trance, with a piece of parchment or some such before him, and he seems almost to be in shadow. Diogenes, on the other hand, is a step or two up, laid back and reading something, which is to say he is not in contemplation, but in a mode of activating and actuating that which he has learned. The philosophers on either side of them are those of the philosophy of Melancholia too, the affairs of arguing, producing, doing various and sundry things, having already supposedly mastered their skills in Melancholia 1, and contemplated it, and now they live out Melancholia 2. The figures in the center at the top of the stairs are Aristotle and Plato, supposedly, and they represent Melancholia 3, wherein they have come to the point of not only living it and learning it and doing it and teaching it, but of being it. They are now philosophy itself at an almost metaphysical level. Kind as that was of Raphael to do for us, I'm afraid it's been lost on most people who bother to look for Melancholia 2 and 3, or even try to understand Melancholia 1. Melancholia 1 by Durer and others is, shall we say, a depiction of what the aspiring artist must go through. They must learn the mastery of their tools, the techniques, so that they may envision, not only for themselves, but for us, what they have seen, so that we may enjoy the benefits of this knowledge without ourselves having to go through it. This is one of the most terrifying things about art. Art takes you where you would be, shall we say, somewhat afraid to go yourself. This is the burden of the artist, and is the benefit shared by the affairs of day, those people who scramble about and make money or do various and sundry mundane activities. The artist, on the other hand, is busy with the interiority, with their own minds, their hearts, their understandings and their visions. Now, one of the things that people fail to realize is what Picasso once said most famously, that all children are artists. The difficulty is to remain an artist when you become an adult. Most of us don't manage that. We manage to appreciate art and what the artist brings to us, but we are not artists ourselves. We are not really consumers of art. In some instances, we are curators, custodians, etc., but we are all of us appreciators of art, and we go further than that. We go much further than that. We actually are able to live through some of what the artist experienced by their art. When we appreciate art, We go into it. It speaks to us. We interact with it. As someone once said, you can look at a painting all month long and never think of it again. Or you can look at a painting once and never be able to forget it. These are the things that art can bring to us. However, whatever art may bring to the audience and the viewer, what it demands of the artist is that they not only feel, know, live through these interior processes of their own or of the society or the culture, but they must be able to communicate them to the world at large and express them through themselves. No one with any sense would ever become an artist. It requires much too much, it is frowned upon too greatly, and for the most part, no one actually appreciates them. 44 Flood has decided to bring forth a series of books on Melancholia, Melancholia in art and what it means to the artist, what it means to the culture, the society the artist operates in, what it means to go into oneself and basically take all of the most intimate moments of one's existence, physical, metaphysical, and philosophical, and try to translate that into paint, paper, canvas, pen and ink, stone and sculpting, metal and the heating and bending and forging of it. In other words, an artist reaches inside themselves, goes into the most deep and hidden places, places that everyone else regards as hoc dragonos, here be dragons, the terra incognita of the psyche itself. They go in, they basically eviscerate themselves, bring out their guts and display them to us, so that we may not have to do it, so that we may see and learn and change and know what we see by their efforts. This melancholia, this furor, this fury, this energy-filled creative state, this is what Melancholia 1 is about. Melancholia 2 will go further, and Melancholia 3 yet further still. The hope is that by bringing Melancholia to public attention, and to the attention of the artist who endure it, that this process may become somewhat conscious, and therefore appreciated in its effects, both upon the artists themselves and on the behalf of societies and cultures. And to be honest with you, people such as myself, who delight in the productions of people like Mr. Weishak, Mr. Templesmith, Minton Matthews, these people and all the other artists that we are working with at 44 Flood make a great sacrifice for us. And when I say us, I don't mean just 44 Flood or the artistic community, but for the collective psyche itself. Without art, without this energized furor of Melancholia 1, 2, and 3, each of us would have to make the evolutionary steps that the artist makes for us. We would all have to see things as many ways as Picasso did. We would have to see the metaphysical, religious, the cosmological picture of a Michelangelo on the Sistine Chapel. We would have to go through that ourselves. We would have to experience the joys, the sorrows, the horror, the fear of Guernica. We would have to understand what May actually meant to Goya. We would have to go through so much, but instead we can visit with these artists themselves in their work. We can continue the discussion that they themselves were brave enough to go in and bring out to us.